The millionaire humiliated the dish served by the cook. "You filthy woman! Even a beggar wouldn't dare to eat this." But she said something that brought him to his knees. The Chicago winter bit hard through the city in January 2025, but nowhere did it feel colder than inside the Davenport mansion. 12 bedrooms, 3 grand halls, and not a single corner that felt like home. Charles Davenport stood at the panoramic window of his study, watching snowflakes dance across the skyline of a city he practically owned. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Davenport?" Martha Thompson asked, her 80-year-old frame slightly bent, but her posture still dignified from decades of service. Charles didn't turn. "Did Lucas call?" Martha hesitated. "No, sir, not today." "Of course not," Charles muttered, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. Why would he? Harvard's full of distractions. Martha had seen this scene replay itself countless times in the 5 years since Grace's plane crash. The growing distance between father and son, the empire with no heir interested in claiming it, the billion-dollar emptiness that had become the Davenport legacy. "Perhaps if you called him first, sir," she suggested. Charles finally turned, his steel-gray eyes hardening. "That's all, Martha." She knew better than to push. As she closed the mahogany door behind her, Martha clutched the railing, a sharp pain shooting through her chest. The doctors had given her 6 months. Maybe less. 6 months to right the wrongs she'd witnessed over nearly 60 years of service to the Davenport family. 6 months to bring Emily home, 2,000 miles away. Emily Walker wiped the sweat from her brow as she worked the dry Tennessee soil. 3 years of drought had turned their once fertile 10 acres into an unforgiving patch of dust and memories. The small farmhouse behind her had seen better days, its white paint peeling to reveal the weathered wood beneath, much like her hopes, wearing thin with each failed crop. "Emily," her grandmother's voice called from the porch, weaker than it had been yesterday. Emily dropped her tools, forcing a smile as she jogged toward the house. "Coming, Gran." Mildred Walker sat in her rocking chair, a quilt across her lap despite the unseasonable warmth. At 75, her eyes still sparkled with the same determination that had raised Emily after her mother's death. "You shouldn't be out there in this heat," Mildred said, patting the chair beside her. "Someone's got to try," Emily replied, taking a seat. She didn't mention the foreclosure notice that had arrived yesterday, tucked now beneath her mattress. "I made your tea. The doctor said it might help with the pain." Mildred took the cup with trembling hands. "Your mother used to say you can heal anything with good food and honest work." "Mom said a lot of things," Emily replied softly, touching the silver medallion that hung around her neck, intricate indigenous engravings catching the late afternoon sun. It was her only inheritance, that and her mother's recipes. "She was right about most of them," Mildred said, but her next words were cut short by a violent coughing fit that left spots of blood on her handkerchief. Emily's heart clenched. "That's it. We're going to the clinic. We can't afford—" "I don't care," Emily insisted, already helping her grandmother to stand. "We'll figure it out." The local clinic confirmed what Emily had feared. Mildred's heart was failing, the same congenital condition that had taken her mother's life. The rural doctor's face was grim as he delivered the news. "She needs specialized care, Miss Walker. In Nashville, maybe even Chicago, where they're pioneering new treatments for this condition." Emily stared at the medical bills already piling up. "How long does she have without it?" "Weeks, maybe a month." That night, after settling her grandmother into bed, Emily sat at their worn kitchen table, head in her hands. The medallion felt heavy against her chest, like it carried all the weight of her family's struggles. Her phone buzzed with a text from her cousin Megan. "Just heard about Aunt Mildred. There's a job opening where I work. Rich family in Chicago needs a new cook-a-sap. Live-in position. Pays triple what you'd make there." Emily bit her lip. Chicago, the big city her mother had always warned her about, where people lost their souls to skyscrapers and ambition. "Would they even hire someone like me?" She texted back. "Worth a shot." Interviews in 3 days. They're desperate after their last chef quit. Looking around the kitchen where her grandmother had taught her every recipe in their family's heritage, Emily made her decision. She texted back a single word: "Coming." 3 days later, Emily stood before the imposing iron gates of the Davenport mansion, her best dress feeling suddenly inadequate, her medallion tucked safely beneath her collar. The cab driver had whistled when they'd pulled up. Someone important must live here. she'd said nervously. Just Chicago royalty, he'd replied with a chuckle. Old money, the kind that buys city blocks for fun, now. Clutching her small resume and a reference letter from the diner where she'd worked back home, Emily pressed the intercom with a trembling finger. Walker for the cook position, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The gate swung open silently, revealing a driveway lined with bare winter trees that seemed to watch her with quiet judgment. The mansion loomed ahead, all stone and privilege and old money. Emily straightened her spine. This wasn't about her pride. It was about Mildred's life. Martha Thompson opened the door herself, something she rarely did these days, but something had drawn her to the security camera feed. A familiar face somehow, though she couldn't place it. When Emily stepped into the grand foyer, Martha's breath caught in her throat. The girl looked so much like, "I'm Emily Walker. I'm here about the cook position." Martha studied the young woman. Warm brown eyes, honey blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, hands calloused from hard work. There was no artifice, no calculation in her face like the usual fortune hunters who orbited the Davenport wealth. "Follow me to the kitchen," Martha said. "Mr. Davenport is away on business. I conduct the initial interviews." As Emily followed the elderly woman through corridors lined with art that probably cost more than her entire farm, she fought the urge to run. This world wasn't hers. But then she thought of Mildred's face as she'd left. Brave, hiding her pain, insisting Emily shouldn't go. "You'll prepare something," Martha said as they entered a kitchen larger than Emily's entire house. "Show me what you can do," Emily nodded, slowly removing her coat. As she reached for an apron, the medallion slipped from beneath her blouse. Catching the light, Martha froze, her eyes fixed on the piece of jewelry. Where did you get that?" Emily touched it self-consciously. "It was my mother's, the only thing I have of hers." "Your mother?" Martha repeated, her voice faint. "And her name was Linda Walker." Emily tilted her head curiously. "Did you know her?" Martha gripped the counter to steady herself, decades of secrets threatening to spill over. The medallion, with its distinctive tribal engravings, was unmistakable. She had been with Charles when he purchased it from a Native American artisan during that fateful summer in Tennessee 30 years ago. The summer he'd fallen in love with a local girl his father had paid to disappear. "No," Martha lied, composing herself. "I don't believe I did." She gestured to the kitchen. "Now, show me what you can do with simple ingredients. That's the mark of a true chef." As Emily began to cook, Martha watched with growing certainty. Charles Davenport's daughter had just walked through his front door, and nothing would ever be the same again. Emily's hands moved with instinctive grace as she surveyed the Davenport kitchen. Marble countertops gleamed under state-of-the-art lighting. Professional equipment worth more than her family's entire farm lined the walls. It was intimidating, yet somehow, the kitchen felt like the only honest room in this monument to wealth. "What would you like me to prepare?" she asked Martha, who was still watching her with an unsettling intensity. Martha composed herself. "Something simple, but revealing. Show me who you are through your food." Emily nodded. Understanding the challenge, she opened the refrigerator, stocked with premium ingredients that would make any chef drool, but instead reached for the basics: flour, butter, milk, and a few humble vegetables. "May I use music while I cook?" Emily asked, her fingers already itching for rhythm. Martha raised an eyebrow but nodded. Emily pulled out her phone, and soon the kitchen filled with the folk melodies her mother had played while teaching her to cook. As the familiar tunes wrapped around her, Emily's nervousness melted away. Her hands found their confidence, and she began to work. Martha watched, transfixed, as Emily transformed into someone else entirely, someone who belonged in this kitchen more than any of the pretentious French chefs Charles had previously employed. There was an authenticity to her movements, a connection to the food that couldn't be taught at culinary school. 90 minutes later, Emily presented a simple meal: buttermilk biscuits with country gravy, roasted vegetables seasoned with herbs, and a small berry cobbler that filled the kitchen with a homey fragrance. "This is what my mother made when we had company," Emily explained. "Simple food that makes people feel welcome." Martha took a bite and closed her eyes. The flavor wasn't sophisticated or trendy, but it carried something more valuable: heritage, love, and the unmistakable Walker touch that she recognized from 30 years ago. when Linda had once cooked for Charles during their secret summer romance. "You're hired," Martha said abruptly. Emily blinked in surprise. "Don't you need to consult with Mr. Davenport?" "Mr. Davenport trusts my judgment with household matters," Martha replied. "He'll be away for another week. You can move in tomorrow and begin familiarizing yourself with the kitchen. The salary is $5,000 per month plus room and board." Emily's knees almost buckled. That was more money than she'd seen in a year, enough to start Mildred's treatment. "I accept," she said quickly, before Martha could change her mind. "But I need to send money to Tennessee right away. My grandmother needs medical care immediately." Martha's face softened. "I'll arrange an advance on your first month's salary." She paused. "This grandmother, she raised you. After my mother died when I was 5. It's just been the two of us since then." Martha nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. "And your father?" Emily's hand unconsciously went to her medallion. "Mom always said he was someone who lost his way but had a good heart. She never told me his name." She shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant about the lifelong absence. "Hard to miss someone you never knew." Martha turned away, unable to meet Emily's eyes. "The staff quarters are on the east wing. The 3rd floor. Your room has a private bathroom and sitting area. Meals for Mr. Davenport are served at 7 a.m., 12:30 p.m., and 7 p.m. precisely. You'll also prepare staff meals and handle any entertaining requirements." As they walked through the mansion toward the staff wing, Martha fought an internal battle that had begun the moment she saw the medallion. She had recognized it instantly. The unique silver piece Charles had commissioned from a Native American artisan during that summer in Tennessee. She had helped him select it, advised him on the engravings, witnessed his uncharacteristic romanticism as he'd planned to give it to "the girl who taught me what real living feels like." That girl had been Linda Walker. And now, her daughter stood before Martha, unaware she was walking the halls of her father's house. The next morning, Emily arrived with 2 worn suitcases containing everything she owned. After sending most of her advance to Tennessee for Mildred's care, she settled into her room, larger than their entire farmhouse living room, and luxuriously appointed in a way that made her feel like an imposter. She unpacked quickly, placing her mother's yellowed recipe cards on the desk and her favorite wooden spoon beside them. Finally, she took out a framed photograph of her mother, young and beautiful, her smile radiant as she held a toddler Emily on her hip. The medallion gleamed at her throat in the picture. Catching the Tennessee sunlight just as it had caught Martha's eye yesterday, Emily touched the medallion now hanging around her own neck. "We're gonna be okay, Mom," she whispered. "Gran's gonna get the treatment she needs." Down in the kitchen, Emily found herself alone in the massive space with Mr. Davenport away and only a skeleton household staff present. She had time to familiarize herself with the equipment and inventory the pantry. She frowned at the pretentious imported ingredients and lack of basics. This kitchen needed love, not luxury. By afternoon, she had reorganized half the pantry and was humming along to her music when Martha appeared at the doorway. Looking pale. "Are you all right?" Emily asked, immediately concerned. Martha waved off her worry. "Just tired, old bones." She watched Emily work for a moment. "You've been busy." "Just making myself at home," Emily replied, then winced. "I mean, getting acquainted with the kitchen." Martha smiled faintly. "It's your domain now. Make it what you need it to be." Emily hesitated. "The staff mentioned Mr. Davenport prefers French cuisine. Charles prefers whatever impresses his business associates," Martha replied dryly. "He hasn't truly tasted food in years." The casual use of his first name caught Emily's attention. Martha noticed and added, 60 years of service earns certain privileges." 60 years. Emily's eyes widened. "You've known him his whole life." "I changed his diapers," Martha confirmed with unexpected humor. "I served his father, Robert Davenport, before him. I've witnessed the building of this empire. Brick by brick, secret by secret." Something in her tone made Emily look up. Martha was watching her medallion again. "It's beautiful workmanship," Martha said softly. "Native craftsmanship like that is rare." "Mom said it was a gift from someone special," Emily replied, tucking it back under her shirt self-consciously. Martha turned away, coughing suddenly. The spasm shook her thin frame. "You should rest," Emily insisted, guiding her to a chair. "Let me make you some tea." As Emily prepared the tea, Martha observed her fluid movements around the kitchen. She looked so much like Linda. The same graceful hands, the same quiet determination. But there was Charles in her too. The proud set of her jaw, the analytical way she organized the space. "Tell me about Tennessee," Martha requested as Emily handed her the steaming cup. So Emily did. She spoke of the small farm that had been in her mother's family for generations, of the drought that had nearly ruined them, of Mildred's stubborn refusal to sell even as wealthy developers circled like vultures. She described learning to cook on a wood-burning stove during power outages, of preserving their heritage through recipes when they couldn't afford to preserve their land. Martha listened, cataloging every detail that confirmed what she already knew. This girl was Charles Davenport's daughter, brought to his doorstep by either cosmic justice or cruel coincidence. "Why did you come to Chicago?" Martha finally asked. Emily's expression grew serious. "Gran's heart is failing. The same condition that took my mom. There's a specialist here who might help, but..." She shrugged. "We've never had that kind of money." "This job is our miracle." Martha nodded slowly, her decision crystallizing. She wouldn't tell Charles immediately about Emily. First, she needed to understand if this coincidence was orchestrated or genuine. Charles would either reject his daughter a second time, or the shock might catalyze some healing of his hardened heart. Either way, Martha needed more time. "The kitchen suits you," she said, rising stiffly. "Make it your own before he returns." As Martha walked away, her hand pressed against her side where the pain intensified daily. The doctors had given her months, but she felt time slipping away faster before she went. She had one last service to perform for the Davenport family, one truth to unbury, one chance at redemption. Emily watched her go, wondering at the strange connection she felt to the elderly woman. Before turning back to her work, the medallion felt warm against her skin as she began to transform the cold, clinical kitchen into a place where real food, and perhaps healing, could begin. By the end of the week, the Davenport kitchen had undergone a transformation. Mason jars filled with dried herbs lined the windowsill, catching morning light. A collection of well-seasoned cast-iron pans hung from a rack where pretentious copper cookware had once gleamed. The sterile atmosphere had given way to something lived-in and fragrant. "He's coming back today," announced Jeffrey, the butler, his perpetually pinched expression more severe than usual. "The jet lands at noon." Emily looked up from the bread dough she was kneading. "I've planned the welcome dinner already." Martha approved the menu. Jeffrey raised an eyebrow at the country-style kitchen. "Mr. Davenport is very particular about everything," muttered Rosa, the housekeeper, as she grabbed a fresh-baked cookie from the cooling rack. "Don't take it personally when he barely notices your food, honey. Man hasn't really tasted anything since Mrs. Grace died." Emily had heard whispers about the late Mrs. Davenport, a socialite whose private plane had crashed in the Alps 5 years ago. The staff spoke of her in hushed, reverent tones, describing a woman who had brought warmth to the mansion that disappeared with her death. "And the son, Lucas?" Emily asked, trying to understand the family dynamics. Rosa and Jeffrey exchanged glances. "Harvard? Business school?" Jeffrey said stiffly. "Hasn't been home in almost 2 years. They had a falling out after the funeral," Rosa added, ignoring Jeffrey's warning look. "Mr. Davenport wanted Lucas to start learning the business. Lucas wanted nothing to do with it." Emily nodded, understanding fractured family relationships all too well. She returned to her dough, adding a sprinkle of herbs from her mother's recipe. Martha appeared at the doorway, moving more slowly than usual. "Emily, a word," in the hallway. Martha handed her an envelope. "Your first week's pay, as promised." Emily's eyes widened at the amount. "This is more than we agreed. The extra is for your grandmother's initial medical consultation," Martha said firmly. "I took the liberty of making an appointment with Dr. Lawrence at Chicago Memorial. He's the best cardiologist in the Midwest." Tears sprang to Emily's eyes. "Martha, I can't." "You can and you will," the older woman insisted. "Family is everything, Emily. Everything." Something in her tone suggested she wasn't just talking about Mildred. Emily wiped her eyes quickly as the mansion's intercom buzzed. "Mr. Davenport's car has arrived," announced Jeffrey's voice. Martha straightened her already impeccable posture. "Remember what I said about the master of the house. He may seem cold, even cruel at times, but there are reasons for it. Old wounds that never healed properly." Emily nodded. wondering at Martha's protective tone. Before she could ask more questions, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the halls. Charles Davenport's voice carried like a winter wind, crisp, cold, authoritative. "Profit margins are unacceptable. Redraft the proposal and have it on my desk by morning." Emily peeked around the corner and saw him for the first time. Tall, imposing, with silver threading through dark hair and a jawline that could cut glass, expensive suit, immaculate posture, eyes scanning his surroundings for imperfections. She quickly retreated to her kitchen. Suddenly nervous, Charles noticed the changes immediately. The house smelled different. Not the sterile emptiness he was accustomed to, but something warm and inviting that triggered unwelcome memories. He frowned as he handed his coat to Jeffrey. "What's that smell?" "Dinner preparations, sir. The new cook. I wasn't informed we had hired anyone. Martha conducted the interviews in your absence, as usual," Jeffrey replied smoothly. "She comes highly recommended," Charles grunted, already distracted by the emails flooding his phone. "Have dinner in my study at 7. I have calls with Tokyo tonight." "Yes, sir, though Martha suggested you might enjoy dining in the small dining room this evening to properly assess the new chef's capabilities." Charles shot him a look that would have withered a lesser man. Jeffrey remained impassive, years of service having immunized him to his employer's moods. "Fine. 7 o'clock, small dining room." Charles headed toward his study, the scent of fresh bread following him like a ghost. He couldn't quite shake. At precisely 7, Emily put the finishing touches on the first course. She had chosen a menu that spoke of comfort without being unsophisticated: butternut squash soup with brown butter and sage, roasted chicken with rosemary and lemon, seasonal vegetables from a local farm, and a warm apple crumble for dessert. "He's waiting," Jeffrey announced, his tone suggesting Emily had already committed some grievous error. Taking a deep breath, Emily carried in the soup herself, wanting to gauge Mr. Davenport's reaction firsthand. Charles sat at the head of the small dining table, papers spread before him. Barely glancing up as she entered, Emily carefully placed the soup before him, the medallion swinging forward from beneath her chef's coat as she leaned in. "Your first course, Mr. Davenport," she said. "Butternut squash soup with—" "I don't need a description," he cut her off, still not looking up from his documents. "Just leave it." Emily straightened, biting back a retort. She'd dealt with difficult customers at the diner back home, but none with this particular brand of dismissive arrogance. "Enjoy your meal, sir," she managed, retreating to the kitchen where she found Martha waiting. "He didn't even look at it," Emily said, unable to hide her disappointment. "Give him time," Martha advised. "Food has associations for him, memories he spent years avoiding." When Emily returned to clear the soup, which Charles had mechanically consumed while continuing to work, she brought the main course. This time, the aroma was strong enough to make Charles pause. He looked at the dish, then finally at Emily. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, something flickering across his face too quickly to identify. "You're new," he stated flatly. "Yes, sir. Emily Walker, I started this week." Charles's gaze was assessing. "Clinical. Where did you train?" "My mother's kitchen, then a local diner in Tennessee," Emily answered honestly, lifting her chin slightly. "Some skills can't be taught in fancy schools." A flash of irritation crossed his face at her subtle defiance. "We'll see if that's true or just rural arrogance." Emily pressed her lips together. "Will there be anything else, sir?" Charles waved her away, but as she turned to leave, he added, "The soup was adequate." From Charles Davenport, Martha had later explained. This constituted high praise. Over the next 3 days, Charles and Emily established an uneasy routine. He continued to work through meals, barely acknowledging her presence, while she quietly observed which dishes he finished and which he merely picked at. She noticed he avoided anything with southwestern spices, but seemed to unconsciously favor dishes with rosemary and thyme. Martha watched their interactions with keen interest, occasionally dropping hints about Charles's preferences that seemed too specific for general knowledge. "How do you know so much about what he likes?" Emily finally asked. Martha smiled enigmatically. 60 years, dear. I notice things." On the 4th evening, everything changed. Charles informed Jeffrey that he would be hosting 4 foreign investors for dinner the following night, crucial partners for a new development project. "They'll expect something impressive," he instructed Emily. Jeffrey will supply you with the appropriate menu. Jeffrey handed her a typed list of elaborate French dishes, the kind designed to showcase wealth rather than flavor. Is this what Mr. Davenport wants, or what he thinks his guests want? Emily asked. Jeffrey's expression remained neutral. Does it matter? This is what was requested. Emily studied the menu, an idea forming. She found Martha in her sitting room, looking more tired than usual. The investors tomorrow, where are they from? Japan and Germany, Martha replied. Why? Because serving them pretentious French food says nothing about who Mr. Davenport is or what America represents, Emily explained. I have a better idea. Martha looked concerned. Emily, Charles doesn't appreciate surprises. Sometimes what people need isn't what they think they want, Emily replied, her mother's favorite saying slipping out naturally. Martha's expression changed, something like recognition flickering in her eyes. Linda used to say something similar, didn't she? Emily blinked in surprise. How did you? Lucky guess, Martha said quickly. Be careful, Emily. Charles can be harsh when challenged. Emily nodded, but her decision was already made. Tomorrow night, Charles Davenport would finally taste real food, her food. Whether he wanted to or not, the dinner with international investors was scheduled for 7 p.m. By noon, Emily had made her decision and was fully committed to her alternative menu. While Jeffrey fretted about the sudden change, Martha observed from the doorway, her expression unreadable as Emily worked. They're going to taste real American cuisine, Emily explained as she ground dried chilies. Not some imitation of European food. Charles won't like this, Jeffrey warned, eyeing the ingredients with suspicion. Emily smiled. If I get fired, I get fired. But they'll remember this meal. As evening approached, the dining room was transformed into a showcase of Davenport wealth. Crystal glasses, sterling silverware, and fresh flowers imported from South America. The investors arrived at 6:45, and Charles led them on a tour of the mansion's main floor, proudly pointing out artwork and architectural details. From the kitchen, Emily heard their voices growing closer. My chef has prepared a special menu highlighting American regional cuisine, Charles was saying, clearly repeating what Jeffrey had nervously informed him. A departure from the usual French fare. The surprise in his voice was evident. Emily tensed, sensing he wasn't pleased with the unauthorized change, but wouldn't contradict himself in front of guests. As the first course went out, a refined version of New England clam chowder served in delicate cups, Emily watched through the kitchen door. The Japanese investors nodded appreciatively, while the Germans made polite comments. Charles's face remained impassive, but his eyes flicked toward the kitchen door where Emily stood. For the main course, Emily had prepared her signature dish, a sophisticated Texas chili con, carne with cornbread, served alongside seasonal vegetables prepared simply to highlight their freshness as she finalized the plating. Adding a small sprig of cilantro to each dish, Martha appeared at her side. It smells like Tennessee summer, the older woman murmured. Emily glanced at her. How would you know what Tennessee smells like? Martha seemed to catch herself. Just an expression, dear. As Jeffrey carried the main course to the dining room, Emily's stomach tightened with anticipation. The chili was her mother's recipe, the one Linda had always claimed could make a broken heart remember how to beat. It was Emily's heritage on those plates, her soul expressed through food. The silence from the dining room was concerning. Emily edged closer to the door, listening. This is unexpected, she heard Charles say, his tone carefully controlled. One of the German investors spoke next. Actually, it's quite wonderful. Authentic American cuisine is hard to find in Frankfurt. Emily allowed herself a small smile of victory. Then came the crash. The sound of a plate hitting the floor silenced all conversation. Emily peered through the crack in the door to see Charles standing, his face contorted with a mix of rage and something else, something that looked almost like fear. This is unacceptable, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Serving peasant food to international business partners? Was this meant as some kind of joke? The investors looked uncomfortable, exchanging glances. Mr. Davenport, began one of the Japanese men. We're actually quite... Jeffrey, have the backup menu prepared immediately, Charles ordered, cutting him off. And send in the cook. Emily straightened her chef's coat, took a deep breath, and pushed through the door. You wanted to see me? "Mr. Davenport?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Charles's eyes were cold fury. "What is the meaning of this? This diner food?" The medallion felt hot against Emily's skin as anger rose within her. This diner food represents authentic American culinary tradition. It's a refined version of Texas chili con carne, showcasing indigenous ingredients and cooking techniques that— "Enough," Charles snapped. "You were given explicit instructions. This trash isn't fit for—" "Mr. Davenport," interrupted one of the Germans. "If I may, this is exactly the kind of authentic experience we appreciate when visiting America. Anyone can serve French cuisine." Charles faltered momentarily before his anger found new focus. "Miss Walker, return to the kitchen immediately. We'll discuss this later." Emily nodded stiffly and turned to leave. As she walked away, she heard him apologizing to his guests, promising that proper food would arrive shortly. Back in the kitchen, she found Martha waiting, her expression concerned. "I warned you," the older woman said softly. "It's fine. I'll start packing." Emily began removing her apron, hands shaking with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "Wait," Martha said. "Let's not be hasty," before they could discuss further. Jeffrey burst through the door, looking flustered. "They're asking for more," he said, clearly confused. "The investors, they want to finish their plates and decline the alternate menu. Mr. Davenport is—" He seemed at a loss for words. Martha and Emily exchanged glances. "Serve the dessert as planned," Martha instructed. "Emily's peach cobbler with bourbon caramel." The rest of the dinner proceeded in tense silence. Charles barely touched his food while the investors cleaned their plates, openly praising the flavors. When the evening finally ended, Emily expected to be summoned and fired. Instead, Charles retreated to his study, and Jeffrey informed her that discussions about tonight's inappropriate menu choices would wait until morning. Emily spent a sleepless night in her staff quarters, alternating between righteous indignation and practical worry about losing the income Mildred desperately needed. By dawn, she had decided to apologize, not for her food, but for changing the menu without approval. She was preparing breakfast when a strange sound emanated from the dining room. So out of place it took her a moment to identify it. Charles Davenport was playing music, old folk tunes that seemed strangely familiar. Emily continued cooking, but her ears strained to catch the melody. It was an old Tennessee song her mother used to hum while cooking. At precisely 7 a.m., Jeffrey appeared to collect Charles's breakfast tray. "Mr. Davenport will take breakfast in his study today," he announced. Emily nodded, having already prepared the usual assortment of bland, continental breakfast items Charles seemed to prefer. She handed over the tray, resigned to waiting for her inevitable dismissal. An hour later, Martha found her in the herb garden, harvesting fresh mint. "He wants to see you in his study." Emily wiped her hands on her apron. "To fire me?" Martha's expression was enigmatic. "Just go." Charles's study was intimidating. Dark wood, leather-bound books, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. He sat behind a massive desk, not looking up when she entered. Emily waited, back straight, preparing her dignified exit speech. "Make it again," he said finally, still not looking at her. "Excuse me. The chili. Make it again." Charles finally raised his eyes to meet hers, and Emily was startled by what she saw there. Not anger, but something raw and uncertain. "Just for me this time." Emily blinked in confusion. "You want me to make the dish you called trash last night?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "The investors were impressed by your creativity. It would be remiss not to properly assess it myself in a less pressured environment." It was as close to an apology as Charles Davenport probably ever came. "Yes, sir. For lunch." He nodded once, dismissively returning to his papers. Emily turned to leave, thoroughly confused by this turn of events. "Miss Walker," he called as she reached the door. Emily paused. "Where did you learn to make that particular dish?" The question seemed loaded with something she couldn't identify. "My mother," she answered truthfully. "It was her specialty." Charles nodded again, his expression unreadable. "That will be all." As Emily closed the door behind her, she found Martha waiting in the hallway. "What happened?" the older woman asked, her voice hushed. "He wants me to make the chili again. Just for him." Martha's hand flew to her heart, and for a moment, Emily thought she might faint. "Martha, are you all right?" The elderly woman steadied herself against the wall. "Just fine, dear. Just surprised." As Emily walked back to the kitchen, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Something beyond a simple food request. The medallion felt warm against her skin, almost as if responding to the strange energy that now permeated the cold mansion. Meanwhile, in his study, Charles sat motionless, staring at a small drawer in his desk that had remained locked for nearly 30 years. Inside lay a photograph he hadn't looked at since his father had forced him to leave Tennessee, threatening to disown him if he didn't end things with "that country girl." The taste of the chili had unlocked something he'd spent decades trying to forget. The memory of a small kitchen filled with laughter, music, and the scent of southwestern spices that had once represented the happiest summer of his life. Emily approached the chili preparation with a blend of curiosity and caution. The request still puzzled her, but she was determined to recreate her mother's recipe perfectly. As she worked, she couldn't help wondering why this particular dish had triggered such a dramatic reaction in her employer. "The secret's in toasting the spices first," she murmured to herself, a habit from cooking alongside her mother as a child. The familiar motions brought comfort as she crushed cumin seeds, dried chilies, and oregano in a mortar, releasing their fragrance into the kitchen. At precisely noon, the chili was ready. Emily ladled it into a simple earthenware bowl, deliberately choosing rustic presentation over the mansion's fine china, and added a slice of freshly baked cornbread on the side. "That smells wonderful," Martha commented, appearing in the kitchen. She looked paler than usual, one hand unconsciously rubbing her side where the pain had grown worse. "Are you sure you're all right?" Emily asked, concern evident in her voice. Martha waved away her worry. "Just tired. Old age catches up with everyone eventually." She eyed the dish. "He's waiting in the small dining room. Go on." Charles sat alone at the table, a leather portfolio open before him but clearly untouched. He looked up when Emily entered, his expression guarded but somehow expectant. She placed the bowl before him without comment. Something shifted in his face as the aroma reached him, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of lips, as if the scent had physically transported him elsewhere. Emily stood quietly, waiting to be dismissed. Instead, Charles picked up his spoon and took a deliberate bite. The impact was immediate and visible. His eyes closed briefly, and when they reopened, they held an emotion Emily couldn't quite identify. "This is exactly how she made it," he said softly, seemingly to himself. "Sir?" Charles looked at her as if suddenly remembering her presence. "Someone I knew long ago. She made chili like this." Emily remained still, sensing a rare moment of vulnerability. Food carries memories. "My mother always said a good recipe is a time machine." Charles's gaze sharpened. "Your mother taught you this recipe?" "Yes. It was her specialty." Emily hesitated, then added, "Her name was Linda." The spoon clattered against the bowl. Charles stared at her with an intensity that made her step back instinctively. "Linda?" he repeated. "From Tennessee?" A chill ran up Emily's spine. "Yes. Did you know her?" The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken significance. Then Charles's expression shuttered closed, the businessman mask firmly back in place. "No. Common name. That will be all, Miss Walker." Emily retreated to the kitchen, heart racing with questions she couldn't quite formulate. Something had just happened, something significant, but the pieces refused to connect. In the privacy of his study, Charles unlocked the desk drawer he'd avoided for decades. Inside lay a faded photograph, a younger version of himself with his arm around a beautiful woman, both laughing against the backdrop of Tennessee hills. Her blonde hair caught the sunlight, and around her neck gleamed a distinctive silver medallion, the same one he'd glimpsed on Emily. "Impossible," he whispered. But the evidence was undeniable. The timeline fit. The resemblance was there in the proud tilt of Emily's chin, the shape of her eyes. Could Linda have been pregnant when his father had torn them apart? The thought opened a chasm of possibilities he wasn't ready to face. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He quickly returned the photograph to its hiding place. "Enter." Martha stepped in, looking frailer than he'd ever seen her. "The doctor called about Mildred Walker's consultation. I scheduled it for next week at Chicago Memorial." Charles frowned. "Who?" Miss Walker's grandmother. She needs specialized cardiac treatment. Martha's tone was carefully neutral. I took the liberty of referring her to Dr. Lawrence, as you've done for staff family emergencies in the past. Charles studied his housekeeper suspiciously. You seem unusually invested in our new cook's family matters. Martha met his gaze steadily. She's talented, worth keeping content. Is that all? He pressed. A flicker of something, guilt perhaps, crossed Martha's face. Should there be more? Charles leaned back, suddenly aware that Martha might know more than she was revealing. She had been there that summer in Tennessee, had witnessed his romance with Linda, had been the one to deliver his father's ultimatum when Robert Davenport had discovered his son's inappropriate dalliance with country trash. No, he finally said. That will be all. As Martha left, Charles reached for his phone, hesitating only briefly before dialing a familiar number. Jackson, he said when his private investigator answered. I need information on someone, Emily Walker from Tennessee, and her mother, Linda Walker, discreetly. Across town, in a luxurious penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Lucas Davenport stared at his laptop screen in confusion. The anonymous email had arrived minutes ago. The Davenport family has more secrets than you realize. Look deeper into your father's past. Someone important has just entered his life. Attached was a decades-old photograph of Charles with a young woman Lucas had never seen before. They looked happy, a stark contrast to the cold, controlling father he'd grown up with. What's got you so serious? Asked Vanessa Morgan, appearing in the doorway of his home office. Her sleek designer dress and perfect makeup seemed excessive for a quiet night in, but Vanessa never relaxed her standards. Lucas closed the laptop. Nothing important. Vanessa raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. Didn't look like nothing. She slinked over, attempting to peek at his screen. Just work, he insisted, standing to block her view. Ready for dinner. Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. Always. As they left for the restaurant, Lucas couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something was happening with his father. Something that might affect the carefully maintained distance he'd put between himself and the Davenport legacy. Back at the mansion, Emily placed a call to the small hospital near her Tennessee farm. How is she? She asked anxiously. Holding stable? The nurse replied. The new medication helps. But Dr. Carter says she needs to see that specialist in Chicago as soon as possible. Emily's throat tightened. Tell her I've scheduled the appointment. I'm sending money for the train ticket tomorrow. After hanging up, she found herself wandering into the garden where Martha was sitting on a stone bench, looking tired but peaceful. Gran's coming next week, Emily said, joining her. For the specialist appointment. Martha nodded. Good, doctor. Lawrence is excellent. Emily hesitated. Martha, something strange happened today. When I mentioned my mother's name, Mr. Davenport reacted oddly. Martha's expression remained carefully blank. How so? Like he recognized it, like he might have known her. Emily twisted the medallion between her fingers. Did he ever visit Tennessee, maybe in the late 90s? Martha looked away. Charles has traveled extensively for business. This wouldn't have been business, Emily pressed. My mother wasn't involved in corporate circles. Perhaps you misinterpreted his reaction, Martha suggested gently. Charles can be difficult to read. Emily wasn't convinced but decided not to push further. Martha clearly knew more than she was saying, but forcing the issue felt wrong, especially given the older woman's increasingly fragile health. You should rest, Emily said instead. You look exhausted. Martha patted her hand. Death comes for us all, dear. I've made peace with mine. The casual reference to mortality shocked Emily. Don't talk like that. You're just tired. Martha smiled sadly. I've served the Davenport family for 60 years. I've seen enough secrets buried to fill a graveyard. Before I go, I'd like to unearth just one. What secret? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Martha stood shakily. In time, dear. In time. As Emily watched Martha slowly make her way back to the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled into a story much larger than herself. A story where her mother's medallion, a simple chili recipe, and Charles Davenport's unexpected reaction were somehow pivotal pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet see clearly. That night, as Emily prepared for bed, her phone chimed with a text from the Tennessee hospital. Attached was a scan of her grandmother's latest test results, which Emily had requested to study, though not medically trained. She'd spent months researching Mildred's condition, desperate to understand it. As she examined the report, focusing on the details of Mildred's cardiac anomaly, a line caught her attention: congenital familial pattern consistent with maternal lineage. Emily stared at those words, thinking of her mother's early death from the same condition. If the cardiac issue was maternal, passed from mother to daughter, then her father's family wouldn't have the same condition. Somehow, this medical detail felt important, though she couldn't yet understand why. The week leading up to Mildred's arrival in Chicago brought subtle but significant shifts to the Davenport mansion. Charles began taking more meals in the small dining room rather than his study. Though he maintained minimal conversation, Emily noticed he seemed to be watching her with an analytical intensity that made her both uncomfortable and curious. Martha's health visibly deteriorated, despite her efforts to hide it. Emily caught her leaning against walls for support, pausing on the stairs to catch her breath, or wincing when she thought no one was looking. "You need to see a doctor," Emily insisted one evening, finding Martha white-faced in the kitchen. "I've seen plenty," Martha replied with a sad smile. "There's nothing more they can do except make me comfortable, and I'd rather be uncomfortable and useful." The day before Mildred's scheduled arrival, Vanessa Morgan appeared at the mansion unannounced. Emily was returning from the herb garden when she spotted the sleek, dark-haired woman handing her designer coat to Jeffrey with imperious familiarity. "Where is Charles?" she demanded. "We need to discuss the charity gala. Mr. Davenport is in meetings downtown until this evening," Jeffrey replied. Vanessa's perfect features arranged themselves into a pout. "How inconvenient. I've come all this way." She glanced around, noticing Emily. "You're new." "Emily Walker, the cook." Vanessa assessed her with a quick, dismissive glance that somehow took in Emily's simple clothes, work-roughened hands, and the herbs clutched in her fingers. "Charming. Well, since I'm here, I might as well have lunch. Something light. I'm watching my figure for the engagement announcement." "Engagement," Emily echoed, looking to Jeffrey. "Miss Morgan is Mr. Lucas Davenport's fiancée," Jeffrey explained, his tone carefully neutral. "Not officially announced yet," Vanessa added with a conspiratorial smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But the ring is being sized at Tiffany's as we speak." Jeffrey showed Vanessa to the sunroom while Emily prepared a light meal, a delicate salad with fresh vegetables and herbs, accompanied by her homemade bread. As she worked, she could hear Vanessa on her phone, her voice drifting through the open door. "Daddy, I told you it's handled." "Yes. I know the campaign needs money. The Davenport fortune will solve everything once we're married. Lucas is being difficult about the prenup, but I'll manage him." Emily tried not to listen. But Vanessa's voice carried. The conversation left her with an uneasy feeling about Lucas Davenport's fiancé. When she delivered the lunch, Vanessa was rifling through papers on Charles's desk in the adjoining study. "Your lunch, Miss Morgan," Emily announced, deliberately making her presence known. Vanessa jumped slightly, quickly sliding the papers back. "Just looking for a pen," she said with a practiced laugh. "Charles wouldn't mind. We're practically family." Emily set down the tray, noting how Vanessa had been examining property documents. "Can I get you anything else?" "This will do," Vanessa replied, already dismissing her. But as Emily turned to leave, Vanessa added, "Wait, Walker, did you say from Tennessee?" Emily paused. "Yes." Something calculated flickered in Vanessa's eyes. "Interesting. My father is Senator Morgan. He represents Tennessee in several land development committees. Small world, isn't it?" The name suddenly connected in Emily's mind. Senator Morgan had been involved in the controversial land deals that had forced many small farmers in her region to sell their properties to developers at fractions of their worth. "Very small," Emily agreed, her voice cooling noticeably. Vanessa smiled like a cat with cream. "Enjoy your time here. These grand old houses are such treasures, aren't they? So unlike those ramshackle farms back in Tennessee." The deliberate barb confirmed Emily's suspicion that Vanessa had recognized her name and was aware of her background. She left without responding. Unsettled by the encounter, later that afternoon, as Emily prepared for Mildred's arrival, Martha found her in the kitchen. "Charles asked me to give you this," she said, handing Emily an envelope. Inside was a check that made Emily's eyes widen. "This is too much. It's for your grandmother's treatment." Martha explained. Charles insists on covering all expenses. Emily stared at the check, confused by such unexpected generosity from a man who had barely spoken 10 sentences to her since her arrival. Why would he do this? Martha's expression was unreadable. Charles has his reasons. Accept it for your grandmother's sake, before Emily could press further. Jeffrey appeared at the door. Miss Walker, your grandmother's taxi has arrived. Mildred Walker stepped carefully from the taxi, looking frailer than Emily remembered, but with the same proud bearing that had sustained her through decades of hardship. Her eyes widened as she took in the mansion. My word, Emmy, she murmured as Emily rushed to embrace her. You didn't say it was a palace. Come inside, Gran, Emily said, supporting her grandmother's arm. There's someone I want you to meet. Martha was waiting in the entrance hall, standing straighter than she had in days, as if gathering her strength for this meeting. The two elderly women regarded each other with an intensity that surprised Emily. Martha Thompson, Martha introduced herself, extending her hand. Mildred Walker, Gran replied, grasping it firmly. My granddaughter speaks highly of you. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Perhaps, or shared knowledge. Emily glanced between them, puzzled by the undercurrent she couldn't quite identify. Let's get you settled, Emily said, breaking the strange tension. Your appointment with Dr. Lawrence is tomorrow morning. As they moved toward the guest room Charles had unexpectedly offered for Mildred's stay, Martha touched Emily's arm gently. Charles would like to meet Mrs. Walker when she's rested. For dinner, perhaps. Emily looked to her grandmother, who nodded calmly. I'd be pleased to meet my granddaughter's employer. Dinner that evening was a study in carefully maintained facades. Charles was impeccably polite, Mildred graciously dignified, and Martha watchful. Emily served a meal that bridged their worlds. Refined comfort food that acknowledged both Mildred's rural roots and Charles's sophisticated palate. This mansion reminds me of pictures I've seen, Mildred remarked partway through the meal. My daughter, Emily's mother, had a photograph book. She spoke of a grand house in Chicago. Charles's knuckles whitened around his fork. Did she visit the city often? No, Mildred replied, her eyes never leaving Charles's face. But she knew it through stories told to her by someone who lived here. The tension at the table was palpable. Emily looked between them, sensing layers of meaning she couldn't access. Your medallion, Charles said suddenly, addressing Emily. May I see it? Surprised, Emily lifted the silver piece from beneath her shirt. Charles studied it with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Unusual craftsmanship, he commented, his voice carefully controlled. Native American. Yes, Mildred answered for her. A gift to my daughter from someone she cared for deeply. Charles's eyes met Mildred's in what seemed like silent acknowledgement. The moment stretched between them before he abruptly changed the subject to Mildred's upcoming medical appointment. After dinner, as Emily helped her grandmother to her room, Mildred gripped her arm with surprising strength. That man, she said quietly. He's the one from your mother's pictures. Emily stared at her. What do you mean? The summer before you were born, your mother fell in love with a young man from Chicago who was visiting Tennessee. They were inseparable for months when he left suddenly. She was heartbroken. Mildred's eyes were intense. That man was Charles Davenport. The revelation left Emily reeling. Are you saying he knew my mother? That they were involved? Mildred nodded slowly. There's more, but it's not my place to tell the whole story. Some truths need to come from those who created them. The next morning, when Emily returned from taking Mildred to her appointment, she found Vanessa in Charles's study again, this time with an older man in an expensive suit. Emily, perfect timing, Vanessa called, with false warmth. This is my father, Senator Morgan. Daddy, this is the cook I mentioned, from Walker Farm in Tennessee. The senator's practiced smile didn't reach his eyes. Walker, interesting coincidence. We've been looking at property acquisitions in Tennessee recently. Emily nodded stiffly. Not much of a coincidence in a small community where families have lived for generations. Until progress necessitates change, the senator replied smoothly. I believe your family's land was part of the Riverside development 30 years ago. The familiar pain of old injustice flared in Emily's chest. Our land was taken through manipulated property laws and falsified documents. We were forced to sell for pennies on the dollar. The senator's smile turned cold. Strong accusations, Miss Walker. I'd be careful making such claims without evidence. Daddy specializes in rural development, Vanessa interjected with malicious sweetness. In fact, we have some fascinating historical documents right here about the Tennessee acquisitions. The Davenport Corporation was actually the primary investor. Isn't that interesting? Emily's world tilted on its axis as Vanessa gestured to papers spread across Charles's desk. Property maps, legal documents, and correspondence bearing the Davenport corporate seal and Robert Davenport's signature. Your family's land, Vanessa continued, tapping a highlighted section, was particularly valuable due to water rights. The previous owner, Robert Davenport, Charles's father, was quite determined to acquire it, something about preventing his son from making a disastrous mistake with local trash. The deliberate cruelty of the revelation struck Emily like a physical blow. Her family's generations of hardship, her mother's struggles to keep what little they had left, all traced back to the Davenport family, to Charles's father. And if her grandmother was right about Charles's relationship with her mother, the implications were devastating. You should ask Charles about it, Vanessa suggested, triumph gleaming in her eyes. I'm sure he'd be happy to explain how his family destroyed yours. The documents blurred before Emily's eyes as the implications crashed through her mind. The Davenport family had systematically destroyed her family's livelihood. Charles had known her mother, been involved with her, and then his father had targeted their land. You look pale, Miss Walker, Senator Morgan observed with false concern. Perhaps you should sit down. Emily straightened her spine, drawing on generations of Walker pride. I'm fine, thank you. If you'll excuse me, I need to check on my grandmother. Of course, Vanessa purred. Family is so important, isn't it? Emily managed to walk calmly from the study, maintaining her dignity until she reached the kitchen. Once alone, she gripped the counter, her knuckles white as she fought to control her breathing. The pieces were aligning with terrible clarity. Charles's reaction to her mother's name, his interest in the medallion, Martha's cryptic remarks, her grandmother's revelation, but the full picture remained elusive, just beyond her grasp. Emily, Martha's voice came from the doorway. Are you all right? Emily turned, anger flaring. Did you know about the land? About what the Davenports did to my family? Martha's face fell. Not everything, not at first. But you suspected who I was from the beginning, didn't you, when you saw the medallion? The older woman nodded slowly. I recognized it immediately. I helped Charles choose it. Why didn't you tell me? Emily demanded. Because the truth is complicated, Martha replied, and not entirely mine to tell. Then whose is it? Emily's voice rose. Charles's? The man whose family stole everything from us. There's more to that story than you know, Martha insisted. Then enlighten me, Emily challenged. Martha opened her mouth to respond but was interrupted by a commotion at the front door. Jeffrey's voice carried down the hallway, followed by a deeper male voice Emily didn't recognize. Your father isn't expecting you, Mr. Davenport. I don't care. I need to speak with him immediately. Emily and Martha exchanged glances before moving toward the hall. A tall young man with Charles's jawline but softer features stood in the entrance, shrugging off Jeffrey's attempts to take his coat. Lucas, Martha said, genuine warmth in her voice. This is unexpected. Martha, Lucas acknowledged with a nod. Is he here? Your father is at the hospital, Martha replied. With Mrs. Walker. Lucas's brow furrowed. Who? My grandmother. Emily stepped forward. I'm Emily Walker, the new cook. Lucas studied her with sudden interest. Walker, from Tennessee. Emily's heart skipped. How did you know that? Before Lucas could answer, the front door opened again, and Charles entered with Mildred. The tension in the foyer became electric as all parties registered each other's presence. Lucas? Charles said, surprise evident in his voice. What are you doing here? We need to talk. Lucas replied tersely. Privately. Whatever you have to say can wait. Charles responded, helping Mildred to a chair. Mrs. Walker needs to rest. Lucas stared at Mildred, then at Emily, his expression calculating. Walker, he repeated. From the anonymous email. What email? Charles demanded. Someone sent me old photographs, Lucas said, watching his father carefully. Of you with a woman in Tennessee. Said I should look into our family secrets. Color drained from Charles's face. "Martha, take Mrs. Walker to her room. Emily, go with them." "No," Emily said firmly. "I want to hear this." Vanessa and Senator Morgan appeared in the study doorway, drawn by the commotion. Vanessa's eyes lit with malicious delight at the unfolding drama. "Perfect timing, darling," she called to Lucas. "We were just discussing the Davenport family's interesting history with Miss Walker's family property." Lucas looked confused. "What property? The land your grandfather acquired in Tennessee 30 years ago?" Senator Morgan explained smoothly. "Through my office's historical records, we've discovered it belonged to Miss Walker's family before some unfortunate legal complications." "Stolen," Emily corrected, her voice tight. "The word you're looking for is stolen." Charles turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Emily, is it true?" she demanded. "Did your father take our land because of your relationship with my mother?" The question hung in the air, its implications silencing everyone. Lucas stared at his father, then at Emily, recognition dawning on his face. "Oh my God," he whispered. Charles opened his mouth to respond but was interrupted by a sharp cry from Martha. She clutched her chest, face contorted in pain, and collapsed to the floor. "Martha!" Emily rushed to her side, all other concerns momentarily forgotten. Charles was already calling for an ambulance, his voice commanding and urgent. "Heart attack. My housekeeper. 79 years old." The next hours passed in a blur of emergency personnel, hospital corridors, and tense silence. Emily found herself in a hospital waiting room for the second time that day. Surrounded by people connected by threads of secrets and resentments, Charles paced relentlessly. Mildred sat quietly, her own frail health temporarily set aside in concern for Martha. Lucas stood apart, occasionally glancing at Emily with undisguised curiosity. Vanessa and her father had mercifully departed, promising to continue their discussion later. Finally, a doctor appeared. "Ms. Thompson is stabilized, but her condition is critical. The cancer has spread significantly." "Cancer," Emily echoed. "She never said terminal pancreatic cancer," the doctor confirmed. "Our records show she was diagnosed 3 months ago. She's refused most treatments." Charles looked shaken. "Can we see her?" "Briefly, she's conscious but very weak." Martha lay small and pale against the hospital sheets, tethered to monitors and IV lines. She beckoned Charles closer when they entered. "No more time for secrets," she whispered. "Tell them." Charles hesitated, his composure cracking visibly. "If you won't, I will," Martha insisted, her voice gaining strength. "I made a promise to myself that I would right this wrong before I died." Charles turned to face Emily, Lucas, and Mildred. His usual commanding presence seemed diminished, replaced by a vulnerability Emily had never imagined him capable of. "Emily," he began, his voice unusually gentle. 30 years ago, I spent a summer in Tennessee, escaping my father's expectations. I met a young woman named Linda Walker. We fell in love." Emily's heart pounded as Charles continued. "When my father discovered our relationship, he was furious. The Davenports didn't associate with country people. He gave me an ultimatum: end things with Linda, or be disinherited. I was young, ambitious, and a coward. I returned to Chicago without saying goodbye." Mildred spoke up, her voice clear, despite her frailty. "Linda discovered she was pregnant after you left. When she tried to contact you, your father intercepted her calls. He threatened her, told her you wanted nothing to do with her or the baby. I never knew," Charles whispered, genuine anguish in his voice. "He never told me. He did more than threaten," Mildred continued. "He systematically acquired all the surrounding properties, cut off our water rights, made it impossible for us to maintain our farm. It was punishment and insurance, making sure Linda could never afford to bring her child to Chicago to find you." Emily felt dizzy, the revelation too enormous to process. "Are you saying—" "Charles is your father, Emily," Martha confirmed from her hospital bed. "I suspected from the moment I saw your medallion, the one Charles gave Linda before he left. The timing fits. The resemblance is there, and your reaction to each other's cooking." She smiled weakly. "Food memories don't lie." Lucas stared at Emily with new awareness. "You're my sister. Half-sister," Emily corrected automatically, still struggling to comprehend the truth. Charles moved toward Emily, uncertainty in every line of his body. "I never knew about you if I had." Emily stepped back, overwhelmed. "I need air." She fled the room, finding her way to a small courtyard where winter air bit at her cheeks. The medallion felt heavy against her skin, the physical link between her parents. A love story that had collapsed under the weight of wealth and class divisions. Charles Davenport was her father. The man whose family had stolen her heritage was the reason she existed at all. Inside the hospital, Martha grabbed Lucas's hand weakly. "There's more. The heart condition that killed Linda and affects Mildred. Emily has it too." Charles froze. "What?" "It's genetic, passed through the female line," Martha explained. "Emily has been hiding symptoms, working herself to exhaustion to care for Mildred." As if summoned by these words, a commotion erupted in the courtyard. Through the window, they could see Emily collapsed on a bench, clutching her chest, her face contorted in pain. Charles ran toward his daughter, shouting for a doctor, the truth of their connection suddenly less important than the desperate need to save her life. The hospital corridor blurred around Charles as he followed the gurney carrying Emily. Medical terms he didn't fully understand echoed. Around him, cardiac valvular dysfunction, congenital condition, immediate surgical intervention. The only words that truly registered were critical condition and family history. "I'm her father," he stated when a nurse blocked his path to the emergency room. The words felt foreign on his tongue, yet undeniably true. "I need to be with her." "You'll need to wait here, sir," the nurse said firmly. "The cardiac team is assessing her now." Charles found himself in yet another waiting room, this one eerily similar to where they'd waited for news about Martha just hours before. Lucas arrived shortly after, looking shaken. "Is it true?" he asked without preamble. "She's really my sister." Charles nodded, unable to formulate a more complex response as the reality of Emily's condition consumed his thoughts. "And you never knew?" Lucas pressed. "Never," Charles whispered. "My father made sure of that." Lucas stared at his father, seeing vulnerability for perhaps the first time. "Did you love her mother?" Charles's gaze grew distant. "Linda was everything your mother wasn't. Genuine, unpretentious. She taught me to see beauty in simplicity." He shook his head. "My relationship with Grace was arranged by our families. With Linda, it was real." Before Lucas could respond, Dr. Lawrence approached, his expression grave. "Mr. Davenport? We need to talk." Charles straightened, instantly alert. "How is she?" "Miss Walker has the same congenital heart valve abnormality that affected her mother and grandmother. The condition has progressed significantly, likely accelerated by stress and overwork. She needs a specialized valve replacement immediately. Whatever it costs," Charles said automatically. "It's not just about cost. The type of valve she needs is rare. There's a waiting list." "Move her to the top," Charles demanded, his voice regaining its authoritative edge. Dr. Lawrence looked uncomfortable. "It's not that simple. The valves are matched based on tissue compatibility, given the rare nature of her condition. Finding a match quickly could be challenging." "Test me," Lucas said suddenly. Both men turned to him in surprise. "We're related," Lucas continued. "Half-siblings share DNA. Test me for compatibility, doctor." Lawrence considered this. "It's possible, though the genetic factors are complex. We can certainly check." "Test me as well," Charles added, as the doctor left to arrange the tests. Mildred appeared, supported by a hospital aide. Her face was drawn with worry, yet there was a strange dignity in her bearing as she confronted Charles. "All these years," she said quietly, "I wondered what kind of man would abandon my daughter without a word." Charles met her gaze directly. "I didn't know she was pregnant. If I had, would it have changed anything?" Mildred challenged. "Would you have defied your father, given up your inheritance, chosen love over money?" The question hung between them, unanswerable across the decades of separation. Before Charles could attempt a response, Dr. Lawrence returned with a nurse. "We need blood samples from both of you," he explained. "We'll rush the compatibility testing." As they followed the medical staff, Charles turned to Mildred. "Regardless of the past, I want you to know I'll ensure Emily receives the best care possible. I have resources. Money doesn't solve everything, Mr. Davenport," Mildred replied, her voice soft but firm. "But right now, it might help save my granddaughter's life, so I won't refuse it." Hours later, the preliminary results confirmed what Martha had already known. Emily was unquestionably Charles's daughter. The DNA comparison revealed a direct paternal match. More importantly, Lucas's tissue typing showed promising compatibility for the valve donation. "This is highly unusual," Dr. Lawrence explained. "We typically use donor valves from cadavers, but in rare cases, a living-related donor can provide tissue for a specialized graft. Given Miss Walker's condition and the genetic similarities with Mr. Lucas Davenport, this may be her best option." "What are the risks to Lucas?" Charles asked immediately. "The procedure is complex but well established. Mr. Davenport would undergo a minimally invasive procedure to harvest tissue for his sister's valve replacement. His recovery would be relatively straightforward compared to hers." Lucas didn't hesitate. "Schedule it as soon as possible." Charles studied his son with newfound respect. Despite their years of strained relations, Lucas was unhesitatingly offering to help a sister he'd just discovered. Perhaps Grace's compassion had lived on in their son, even if Charles had failed to nurture it. While the surgical teams prepared, Charles found himself drawn to Emily's room in the cardiac care unit. She lay unconscious, intubated and connected to machines that maintained her fragile hold on life. She looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in a way that made his chest tighten with unfamiliar emotion. "You should talk to her," a nurse suggested, checking the monitors. Sometimes patients can hear even when sedated, left alone with his daughter. Charles stood awkwardly at her bedside, decades of emotional restraint making it difficult to find words. "I don't know if you can hear me," he began hesitantly. "I'm not good at this, talking about feelings. Your mother was the expressive one." The steady beep of the heart monitor was his only response. "I want you to know that I would have been there if I'd known about you. I was young and foolish and afraid of losing everything. But a child," he swallowed hard. "No fortune is worth missing a daughter's life." Charles touched the medallion that still hung around Emily's neck. The nurses had left it in place at Mildred's insistence that it provided comfort and protection. "I remember the day I gave this to your mother. We were by the river on her family's property. She'd been teaching me to fish, laughing at how hopeless I was at it. The sun caught her hair just right, and I thought, this is what happiness feels like." He traced the intricate engravings with his finger. "I commissioned it from a local artisan. The design tells a story about interconnected paths, how people can separate but remain linked by invisible threads. I thought it was romantic nonsense at the time. But now, the irony wasn't lost on him. How the medallion had traveled full circle, bringing his daughter back to him through a series of coincidences too perfect to be mere chance. In the surgical prep area, Lucas was answering the anesthesiologist's questions when Vanessa burst in. Her perfect composure visibly rattled. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "The hospital called about emergency surgery for her." "Hello to you too," Lucas replied dryly. "Yes, I'm donating tissue for a heart valve for my sister." "Sister?" Vanessa's eyes widened. "That cook is claiming to be a Davenport now, Lucas. Can't you see this is a con? She shows up with some sob story and a convenient heart condition right when we're discussing the prenup." Lucas studied his fiancée, seeing her through new eyes. "There's DNA confirmation, Vanessa, and she didn't claim anything. She didn't even know until today. You're risking your life for someone you just met," Vanessa pressed. "What about our plans? The campaign support your father promised mine." "Is that what this engagement is about?" Lucas asked quietly. "Political alliances and business deals." Vanessa's expression hardened. "Don't be naive. All marriages at our level are strategic. Your parents' was. And look how well that turned out," Lucas countered. "My father spent his life regretting the choice he made for money and position. I won't make the same mistake." Understanding dawned on Vanessa's face. "You're breaking up with me. Over this kitchen help who suddenly turns out to be your long-lost sister. Do you have any idea what my father can do to your family's business interests?" Lucas removed the platinum band from his finger, the promise ring Vanessa had insisted he wear until the official engagement. "Tell your father to do his worst," he said, placing the ring in her palm. "Family comes first. I'm just sorry it took me this long to understand that." Vanessa's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this, Lucas. Both of you will." As she stormed out, Lucas felt a strange lightness. For the first time in his adult life, he was making a choice based on values rather than expectations. Whatever happened next, he would face it knowing he'd taken a stand for something that mattered. The surgical waiting room had become a strange gathering place for their fractured family. Charles and Mildred sat in uneasy proximity, occasionally exchanging words about Emily's childhood or Linda's life. After Charles, Martha had been moved to a room on the same floor, insisting on regular updates despite her own critical condition. "She makes the best biscuits I've ever tasted," Mildred was saying. "Just like her mother." Charles nodded. "Her chili. It took me back 30 years. The first time I tasted it, I thought I was imagining things." "Food memories are the strongest," Mildred agreed. Linda always said that was why she cooked, to create memories that would outlast her. As they spoke, Dr. Lawrence appeared, still in surgical scrubs. Charles and Mildred rose in unison, faces tense with anticipation. "The procedures went well," he announced. "Lucas is in recovery and stable. Emily's surgery was more complex, but the valve replacement was successful. The next 48 hours will be critical. But I'm cautiously optimistic." Relief flooded through Charles with an intensity he hadn't experienced since Lucas's birth. His children, both of them, were going to be all right. As Mildred wept quietly beside him, Charles found himself doing something he hadn't done in decades. He prayed, thanking whatever power had brought Emily into his life and giving him a chance to right the wrongs of the past. The week following the surgeries passed in a blur of hospital rooms, medical consultations, and tentative conversations. Emily regained consciousness 3 days after the operation, disoriented and weak but alive. Her first coherent words were to ask about her grandmother and Martha. "They're both fine," Charles assured her, awkwardly perched at her bedside. "Mildred is resting at the mansion with private nursing care, and Martha has been moved to a private room on this floor." Emily studied him with new awareness. "So it's true. You're my father." It wasn't a question, but Charles nodded anyway. The DNA test confirmed it. A heavy silence fell between them. Decades of absence impossible to bridge with simple words. "Lucas gave me his heart valve," Emily finally said, her hand drifting to the surgical dressing on her chest. "Partial valve tissue," Charles corrected. "But yes. Why would he do that for someone he just met?" Charles's expression softened. "He said family comes first. I think he's wiser than I ever was at his age." Emily turned away, tears threatening. "I don't know how to feel about any of this. My whole life, I wondered about my father. Mom always said you had a good heart but lost your way." She gave a bitter laugh. "Now I find out you're the son of the man who destroyed our farm, who forced us into poverty." "I didn't know what my father did," Charles said quietly. "It doesn't excuse my absence, but I truly didn't know." "Would it have mattered if you did?" The question echoed Mildred's earlier challenge. Charles didn't answer immediately, understanding that platitudes would ring hollow. "I'd like to think it would have," he finally said, "but I was young and ambitious and afraid. The truth is, I don't know what I would have done then. I only know what I want to do now. And what's that? Make amends. To you, to your grandmother, to the community my father harmed." He leaned forward. "I can't change the past, Emily, but perhaps we can build something better for the future." Emily studied him, seeing both the cold, demanding employer she'd first met and glimpses of something warmer, something perhaps closer to the young man her mother had loved. "I need time," she said finally. "This is a lot." Charles nodded, accepting her boundary. "Of course, rest and recover. We can talk more when you're ready." As he rose to leave, Emily called after him. "Lucas? Is he okay? After the surgery?" "He's doing well. He's been asking about you. I'd like to see him when I'm stronger." Charles nodded, a fleeting smile crossing his face. "I'll let him know." 3 days later, Emily was strong enough to sit up in a wheelchair. A nurse helped her navigate the short distance to Martha's room, where the elderly woman lay propped against pillows, looking frailer but alert. "There you are," Martha said, her face lighting up. "I was beginning to think they wouldn't let you visit." Emily wheeled herself to the bedside. "Why didn't you tell me about Charles being my father?" Martha sighed. "I needed to be sure first, and I wanted to understand your intentions, whether you'd somehow discovered the connection and were seeking compensation." "You thought I was a con artist?" Emily asked, hurt evident in her voice. "Only briefly," Martha assured her. Your cooking removed all doubt. No one could fake that connection to Linda's recipes. She reached for Emily's hand. Besides, I wanted to see if you and Charles would recognize each other naturally, without my interference. The chili, Emily realized. That's why he reacted so strongly. Martha nodded. Linda made it for him every Sunday that summer. It was their ritual. Emily absorbed this new piece of her origin story. Were they really in love, or was it just a summer fling? Oh, it was love, Martha said with certainty. The kind that changes you forever. Charles was different after Tennessee. Harder, more focused on success, as if trying to prove his father's interference was worth the sacrifice. She shifted in her bed, wincing slightly. I never told you how I discovered your existence. 5 years after Charles left Tennessee, I received a letter from Linda. She was very ill by then, and wanted someone to know about you, in case you ever found your way to Chicago. Martha's eyes grew distant with memory. She didn't ask for money or recognition, just for someone to keep an eye on you from afar. I sent small, anonymous gifts to your grandmother over the years. College fund contributions, medical bill payments. Charles never knew. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. You've been watching over me my whole life, as best I could without interfering. When Mildred's health declined and I learned of my own cancer diagnosis, I decided it was time to bring you home. Martha smiled weakly. I didn't expect you to answer an ad for a cook position, but the universe works in mysterious ways. Emily realized the job opening had never been coincidental. Martha had orchestrated her arrival, perhaps even ensuring her cousin Megan knew about the position. Thank you, she whispered, squeezing Martha's hand. For everything. Lucas knocked on Emily's hospital door the following afternoon, looking remarkably recovered despite his recent surgery. Hey sis, he said with an awkward wave. Mind some company? Emily gestured to the chair beside her bed. Please. I've been wanting to thank you. No need, Lucas replied, settling carefully into the seat. Apparently, saving my long-lost sister makes up for years of disappointing our father. Best investment I've ever made. His wry humor surprised a laugh from Emily. Is that how you see it? An investment? Harvard Business School, he said with mock seriousness. Everything's an investment opportunity. Then his expression softened. But seriously, how are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, but the doctors say I'm doing well. She studied him curiously. Vanessa hasn't visited. I thought she'd be hovering around her fiancé after surgery. Lucas grimaced. Ex-fiancé, actually. We broke up right before the surgery. Because of me? Emily asked, alarmed. Because of her, Lucas corrected. Finding out about you just accelerated a realization that was already forming. Vanessa saw me as a means to an end. Access to the Davenport fortune and connections for her father's political aspirations. I'm sorry, Emily offered. Lucas shrugged. Don't be. Dad spent his life in a loveless marriage because he walked away from your mother. I'm not making the same mistake. The parallel wasn't lost on Emily. He told you about that. More than he's ever shared before. I think finding you has changed him. Lucas leaned forward. I've never seen him like this. Vulnerable, reflective. He's been on the phone constantly, setting up something called the Walker Restoration Project. Emily's breath caught. What's that? I'm not entirely sure, but it involves property restitution in Tennessee and a foundation for rural community development. The door opened before Emily could respond, revealing Charles with an armful of documents and a determined expression that softened when he saw his children together. Good, you're both here, he said, awkwardly navigating the emotional terrain of finding his son and daughter in conversation. I have something to show you. He spread the papers across Emily's bed. Property deeds, foundation documents, architectural plans. These are the original boundaries of the Walker farm, he explained, pointing to a map. And all the surrounding properties my father acquired. I've arranged to restore them to Mildred's ownership, with additional acreage as compensation for 30 years of lost income. Emily stared at the documents in disbelief. You're giving our farm back. It's yours by right, Charles said simply. What my father took through manipulation, I'm returning with interest. He showed them more papers. Plans for an agricultural education center, a community kitchen, restoration of watershed rights, and a foundation named after Linda Walker to support rural preservation efforts. The Linda Walker Foundation will provide grants to struggling family farms and fund culinary education programs focusing on traditional American cooking techniques. Charles hesitated. If you approve, of course, it's your heritage. Emily traced the foundation logo, a stylized medallion with the same indigenous patterns as the one she wore. This is overwhelming. It's just the beginning, Charles continued, a new energy animating his usually controlled demeanor. I've been blind to the damage my family's company has done in the name of progress. That changes now. Lucas watched his father with growing respect. You're really serious about this. Deadly serious, Charles confirmed. The Davenport legacy needs to be about more than accumulating wealth and power. I want to leave something better for both of you. Something shifted in Emily's perception of her newfound father. The arrogant businessman was still there, but now she glimpsed the idealistic young man her mother had fallen in love with. Someone capable of passion and principles when freed from his father's toxic influence. I want to help, she said finally. With the foundation, it should truly represent Mom's values, not just be a corporate penance project. Charles nodded, visibly relieved by her engagement rather than rejection. I was hoping you would say that. Your voice should guide this work. As they continued discussing possibilities, a nurse arrived with news. Martha was asking for them urgently. They found her looking peaceful but undeniably weaker, her breathing shallow. My time's nearly up, she said when they gathered around her bed. But I needed to see you together before I go. Don't talk like that, Charles said sharply. The doctors say with the new treatment. Martha waved away his protests. I've made my peace, Charles. I've lived long enough to see my final wish fulfilled. The Davenport family whole again. She reached for Emily's hand. I left something for you in my quarters. A letter from your mother to Charles that his father intercepted. And my own journals, documenting everything. The truth should be preserved. To Lucas, she said, watch over them both. They're more alike than either realizes. Stubborn, passionate, and terrible at admitting when they're wrong. Finally, to Charles, she whispered something that made his eyes glisten with uncharacteristic emotion. He nodded once, firmly, as if accepting a solemn charge. Martha smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. My work here is done, she murmured. The rest is up to you three. 1 year later, the transformation of the east wing of the Davenport mansion into the American Culinary Heritage Center was complete. Where once cold marble and untouchable antiques had dominated, warm wooden workstations and state-of-the-art cooking facilities now welcomed students from across the country. Emily stood in the center of the main teaching kitchen, surveying the space with quiet pride. Photographs of traditional American cooks lined the walls, including a prominent one of Linda Walker, smiling from her Tennessee kitchen, the silver medallion gleaming at her throat. Are we ready for the big day? Charles asked, entering with a stack of programs for the evening's grand opening gala. Emily nodded, adjusting her chef's coat, custom designed with the Linda Walker Foundation logo embroidered over the heart. The students have been practicing all week. The menu represents culinary traditions from 12 different American regions. Charles smiled, a genuine expression that had become increasingly common over the past year. Your mother would be proud. So would Martha, Emily added softly. Martha Thompson had passed away peacefully 3 days after their hospital visit, but her influence remained. Her meticulously kept journals had provided a detailed account of the Davenport family history, including Robert Davenport's machinations to separate Charles and Linda. Reading her mother's intercepted letter had been both heartbreaking and healing for Emily, finally completing the picture of her parents' truncated love story. Lucas called from Tennessee, Charles said, changing the subject. The restoration of the Walker farmhouse is finished. Mildred is supervising the planting of the heritage garden. Emily smiled at the image of her grandmother, now healthier thanks to successful treatment, directing workers with her characteristic blend of gentleness and steel. After decades of struggle, Mildred Walker had reclaimed her family's land, expanded and improved through the Davenport resources, and was thriving in her role as the foundation's rural community liaison. When does he get back? Emily asked, referring to her half-brother. Tonight, just in time for the gala. He's bringing Jessica. Emily nodded approvingly. Lucas's new girlfriend, a brilliant environmental lawyer he'd met through the foundation's work, was a welcome change from Vanessa. The senator's daughter had made good on her threats, attempting to create problems for Davenport Industries through her father's political connections. But the family had weathered the attacks with surprising resilience. "I should check on the chili," Emily said, moving toward the stove where her signature dish simmered. It had become something of a symbol for their family, the dish that had triggered recognition, confrontation, and ultimately healing. The evening's gala would feature it as the centerpiece, served alongside the fine wines and delicacies expected at high society events. What had once been dismissed as peasant food would be elevated to its rightful place in American culinary heritage, just as Emily herself had found her rightful place in the Davenport family. Hours later, the mansion buzzed with activity as Chicago's elite mingled with rural community representatives, culinary students, and food justice advocates. The unlikely combination of guests reflected the foundation's mission, bridging divides through shared food traditions. Emily, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, the medallion prominently displayed at her throat, moved through the crowd with newfound confidence. A year ago, she had entered this house as a desperate job seeker. Tonight, she co-hosted as a Davenport. "There's my little sister, charming the mayor," Lucas called, appearing with Jessica on his arm. He embraced Emily warmly. "The place looks amazing." "So does the farm," Emily replied. "Gran sent photos of the new greenhouse." Lucas grinned. "She's a taskmaster. Had me replanting an entire section of herbs because the rows weren't perfectly straight." "That sounds like Gran," Emily laughed. "How are the community workshops going?" "Fully enrolled through next year. We've got fourth-generation farmers teaching sustainable agriculture alongside university ag science professors. It's exactly what the foundation should be doing." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Charles, who clinked a glass for attention. The crowd quieted as he moved to the center of the grand hall. "Welcome to the inaugural celebration of the Linda Walker Foundation and the American Culinary Heritage Center," he began, his commanding presence drawing all eyes. "Many of you have asked why I've devoted significant resources to preserving rural cooking traditions and supporting family farms. The answer is simple. I'm honoring a promise that should have been kept 30 years ago." He gestured to Emily, who moved to join him. "This is my daughter, Emily Walker. Her mother taught me that true wealth isn't measured in property or portfolios, but in the richness of traditions passed down through generations." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Though many had heard rumors of Charles Davenport's secret daughter, this was his first public acknowledgement. "Together with my son, Lucas," Charles continued as Lucas joined them, "we're redefining the Davenport legacy. For too long, our family's success came at the expense of communities like the one that gave Emily her start. Today, we begin to balance that equation." As Charles outlined the foundation's ambitious goals, restoring agricultural land to traditional owners, preserving regional culinary knowledge, creating sustainable economic opportunities in rural areas, Emily watched the crowd's reactions. Some of Charles's business associates looked skeptical, but others appeared genuinely moved by the personal transformation of Chicago's most notorious hard-nosed developer. "And now," Charles concluded, "I invite you all to experience American culinary traditions through the tasting stations our students have prepared. At the center, you'll find a special dish, a Texas chili that changed the course of our family history." As the guests dispersed toward the food, Emily felt a wave of emotion. "That was quite a speech," she said to her father. Charles shrugged, a hint of his old discomfort with emotional displays returning. "It needed to be said. I found something you should see," Lucas interjected, pulling a weathered journal from his jacket. "While overseeing the farmhouse renovation, it was hidden beneath a floorboard in what must have been your mother's room." Emily accepted the book with trembling hands. Opening it, she found her mother's handwriting. Recipes, memories, and letters never sent to Charles. Near the end, a passage caught her eye. "My dearest Emily, if you ever find this journal, your father was not the villain of our story. We were both young, both caught in circumstances beyond our control. The medallion I leave you carries our connection, a symbol that paths may diverge but remain eternally linked. Should you ever meet Charles Davenport, judge him not by his absence, but by the man he might become when freed from his father's shadow. There is good in him. I saw it clearly, if only for one perfect summer." Tears blurred Emily's vision as she passed the journal to Charles, who read the passage with visible emotion. "She never blamed you," Emily said softly. Charles closed the journal carefully. I've spent a year making amends, but I never dared hope for forgiveness. Mom understood what I'm just beginning to learn, Emily replied. That we're all shaped by our roots, but not defined by them. We can grow into something new without forgetting where we came from. The moment was interrupted by Mildred Walker's arrival. Despite having been in Chicago for a week, she'd insisted on making a grand entrance to the gala, stunning in a simple blue dress that highlighted her dignified bearing. "There's my family," she called, embracing Emily warmly before turning to Charles with measured affection. Their relationship had evolved from tense civility to genuine respect over the months of working together on the foundation. "Mildred," Charles greeted her, "you look spectacular. For an old woman with a patched-up heart," she quipped, but her eyes sparkled with life. "They're about to serve the chili," Lucas announced. "We should take our places." As they moved toward the main table, Emily was struck by the improbable journey that had brought them to this moment. The daughter of a rural cook and a wealthy businessman, she had bridged worlds that seemed impossibly distant. The medallion at her throat, the physical link between her parents, caught the light, its engravings telling the story of paths that separate but remain connected through invisible threads. When the chili was served, in elegant bowls, but preserving its authentic, rustic character, Charles raised his glass. "To Linda," he said simply, "who taught me the true taste of life. To Martha," added Emily, "who brought us together. To Roots," Lucas concluded, "and the courage to honor them." As the flavors of the chili, her mother's recipe, unchanged across decades and social divides, filled the room, Emily felt a sense of completion. The taste carried memories of Tennessee summers, of her mother's kitchen, of traditions that had survived against all odds, but it also carried the promise of something new, a family reclaimed, a legacy redefined, a future where the Davenport name stood for reconciliation rather than exploitation. In that moment, the taste of her roots had never been more sweet.